Hi, Frank Thomas here. I've got a really quick video tutorial for you today. We're going to talk a little bit about constructors and destructors in C#. Now, there seems to be some confusion around it, especially again with newer developers, and even seasoned developers at times can make some critical mistakes when it comes to using constructors and destructors in C#. Now, I'm going to add a comment in the fact that destructors are a factor in C#, but they're not used very much. But let's hit the golden question. What is a constructor and a destructor? What they are is they are a method that is run when you instantiate a class. Now, as you know, in object-oriented programming, we will write classes, which are the blueprint of a future piece of functionality, whether it's just an object with properties or it has methods which can run and do calculations or whatever we decided for it to do. A constructor is what is run, and a constructor is always run when you instantiate a class. Now, there is an assumed constructor. It's probably not the right way to say it, but that's what I'm going to call it, an assumed constructor that will run when you instantiate a class. Let's just take a look at a piece of very simple code right now. Here we have a basic class called client, and the constructor, we have an empty constructor here. We have a constructor that will accept a name and a description, and one will accept an ID name description. Okay. I have a deconstructor down here, which is just commented out for the time being. And you can see here inside of our class, we have an int, which is an ID, a name, and a description. Okay. Now we're getting squigglies here simply because this constructor is going to allow the name and description to be null. And it, even though we really shouldn't have null strings inside of C#, the compiler's not going to complain. It's not going to throw an error. It's just going to throw warnings at us. As you can see, non-nullable property name must contain a non-null value when exiting constructor. Okay, that's the reason why it's not happy, but the code will run. Now let's take a look at our actual program here. We have one new client that's being set up here with no input variables, and we have one here with a name and description. Now we can enter a third one here, and because my client is overloaded or my constructors are overloaded, I can select multiple situations here. Now I can put in 0, a name, and these are all valid statements because we have a constructor for each and every one of these statements. Now what happens is let's just make these two go away, okay? And inside of our actual client class here, let's comment it out, these specialized constructors. So now we just have the basic one. Now I'm going to comment this one out as well, because when you initially set up this class, you don't have any constructors, and you definitely don't have any deconstructors. Deconstructors are a class that will run when this is being thrown away, and you can do special garbage collection or things like that. But believe it or not, in all the years I've written in C#, I've never created a deconstructor. No, I take that back. There's only one occasion where I had to write them, and I can't even remember the reason why, so don't worry about them too much. They do exist, they do happen automatically, but what's important here is to realize that even though we don't have any constructor, even an empty one, it's still happening in the background. It happens just by magic. So whenever I do a declaration to create a new client, it's going to run that unspecified or default constructor in the background. Okay, so when we get to this line here, we can actually see that it's actually created a new client, ID of 0, and description and name of null, and it's happy with this. Everything runs just tickety-boo fine. Now this is where we can get into trouble. Let me just demonstrate to you. Let's say later you think, I really want to make sure that a name and a description are inputted. I don't want null for the name nor the description. I want something to be there. So what happens is we create a constructor. This is where the problems begin. Now, we've not declared an empty constructor. We've just declared a constructor to ensure that we actually set a value for name and description. Now, if we go back to our code, because the code is right here and it's in our face, the pre-compiler compiler can see, hey, you can't do this. You haven't got a constructor that takes no input values. Because the minute that we created a constructor, the default one that takes no input values is no longer there. What the system is realizing, or the compiler is saying, oh, you're going to give me the constructors that are going to be allowed. And this is why all of a sudden we're getting an error. Now what happens is an error like this can be hidden in a secondary project somewhere inside of the actual whole solution. And what happens is we don't see it. We don't see it until, a user strikes upon a certain section of the software and they call a certain section and bam, the software blows up. And that's why you'll see, I call them runtime errors. They're not really, they should be compile errors. They should be pre-runtime errors where the error is caught before the program is run, but it can be missed. And I have seen it missed in the past. So it's always important, and this is why you will see at times when a program has an empty constructor, just like this, okay, where there's nothing in it. This way, they're protecting the integrity of the original code base, but now they can actually do things like they can call an empty, like a new client with no input variables. They can call a new client with a name and a description because we have a constructor for that. We can go even one step further and overload the constructor even further by creating one that calls the ID, name, and description. You can see here, I can light this one up. Life is good. Okay, we still have the option because we have the empty constructor. We can still do something like this. Okay, and we can actually say ID is equal to 2 and call it just like that. Because again, we have a constructor that it has the ability to take no input properties in the actual input field here, because this in the code is just like writing this. Okay, this is just as valid. So if you're always wondered about that, that's the reason why. But that is why we have the ability to do this. Now it's really important, like I said, to watch out for situations where the code becomes more refined over time, and they are like, no, we got to make sure that we actually have these variables. And we'll overload it as well. We're willing to do that, and nobody writes an empty constructor because there might be code here that needs it, like right here and right here. Now, if we take this here and comment this out, you'll see that we're going to get a few errors now. Both of these lines are going to come up with red squigglies because, again, this is like calling a client with an empty declaration here. Even though we've declared information in here, we can even say, do that, and the system doesn't care. It wants to see those values inside the declaration string here, not in here. Okay, very, very subtle difference. It's a good standard to have, but always watch out. Now, this is the reason why we have constructors and deconstructors. They're very handy, they're very helpful. Make sure when you're looking at your code that you fully understand what's going on inside your code. C#, because of changes and adaptations and enhancements, its feature set has changed dramatically over the years, and sometimes, like writing tax law, you can have one law overwrite the other. So you have to be careful, and even in the C# world, for things like that. So hopefully you'll find this useful. If you did, please like the video. If not, you don't have to like it, of course. But I really do hope that you do, and I hope to have a lot more useful tutorials. And in the comments, please feel free to leave a comment if there's something you've been wondering about in C# that you would like a better answer for. Thanks very much. My name is Frank Thomas, and I'll talk to you again.